Although we are of course many years away from stepping into the world of Red Dead Redemption 3, there's no reason we can't speculate as to whose boots we'll be filling during our time there, and in today's video we're going to be discussing the most likely protagonists, why each one could work in their own way and why some may not. Welcome to the video, you're listening to Phil of Philby Gaming. If you enjoy the following, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, after watching please consider doing so. With that being said, let's begin. So probably the most common topic considering this will be to experience the history and formation of the Van der Linde gang itself. Those who have explored this topic, and if you haven't, be sure to check out the video linked in the description and posted as the end screen to this very one, will already be aware as to the narrative of each and every individual member and how they came to fall in with the group. Many wish to see the early days, from Dutch leaving home at the age of 15 to meeting Hosea in 1872, then later John, Arthur, Susan and Bessie joining. I would personally really enjoy watching this, but it's a story that's already been told. In order for this to work, Rockstar would have to take a similar stance to as they did when telling the prequel to Marston's story, whereas they would need to introduce an entire new flock of characters to join the ones we already were acquainted with. When playing the 2010 Red Dead Redemption, it was heavily implied that the only Van der Linde gang members were Dutch, Bill, Javier, Abigail, Uncle and John, plus Jack if you will. When the second installment was released, we were introduced to around a further 20 or so characters, giving us a more detailed and diverse backstory to the group. This worked, but it still begged questions as to why John in RTR1 never mentioned anyone else aside from the select few, especially Arthur Morgan, with Rockstar only implementing that although John thinks of Arthur often, he doesn't like to talk about him. We of course understand that the full tale of the Van der Linde gang hadn't been written at this point, and of course there were going to be an array of unanswered questions, but to do this twice seems unlikely. We already know the full history of the gang, so unfortunately I doubt Rockstar will pursue this avenue as a narrative. This could also rule out the potential narrative of reliving either John or Arthur's past, as it all falls under the same tale. One tale I would definitely like to see, as I'm sure others would too, is the history of the Callander Boys. Both brothers, Davey and Mac, although not mentioned often, are often spoke highly of by the other members of the gang, such as Hosea Matthews and Micah Bell. We also witnessed the pain in Abigail's face during the passing of Davey in the opening segments of RDR2, plus the immediate anger shown by Arthur upon learning of Mac's death. This shows us that the two boys had made an impact on the gang for not only their fierce ways, but also showing a more heartfelt side to themselves, making them an adored duo. The Callander Boys hadn't been with the Van der Linde gang for a great deal of time, so a narrative exploring their history before the events of joining has the potential to not only tell a lengthy story, including home life and how they entered the criminal world, but a meaningful one, exploring the bonds between two brothers, and how and why they no longer felt running it alone was best, leading them to falling in with Dutch. A topic that would certainly be a popular one is the story of everyone's favourite secondary character, Sadie Adler. Meeting Sadie in the opening segments of RDR2, then having her along for the journey up until shortly before the fall of Arthur Morgan has already been told, but what we don't know is the exact tale of Sadie following this. We know a little from the epilogue, where she spent time accruing a reputation as a fearsome bounty hunter, but before reuniting with John in 1907, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. We also have the history of Sadie and her marriage to Jake. This could be told in a series of flashbacks similar to how Ben Studios did concerning the relationship of Deacon St. John and Sarah Whitaker in Days Gone. Plus, after Sadie departs from Beach's Hole in search of work down south in Mexico, what is the story there and how did she fare? In the Red Dead Redemption universe, the lands of Mexico seem much less tame than the lands of America, even in 1911, so how was her time in this region for the 4 years before John entered these unknown lands? Was she successful in finding work providing security, or did she find herself caught in a world of conflict during dire times? How would Sadie have dealt with all of this? Did she return to the United States, or did she make the southern setting a more permanent home, similar to that of Landon Ricketts, hoping to live out her days in peace? There are so many questions surrounding this that Rockstar would be fools to not explore this topic. We could also explore an angle that Pinkerton agent Edgar Ross continued to be ruthless in his search for hunting down the last of the Van der Linde gang. Did he follow Sadie to Mexico, similar to how he would John some years later? This could also answer why there was no mention of her by the detectives during the events of 1911. And what of the history of the self-proclaimed one-shot kid? By the time we first encounter Uncle in 1899, he's much older than the rest of the Van der Lin's gang. At this age, he just wants a life of peace and know that he can't fight like he used to. This is why he prefers to scope out potential possibilities other than partake in them himself. But surely there must be a criminal history behind the man. How else would he know how to gather information on possible robberies and such? Very little is known about the history of Uncle other than stories told around the campfire, often which are scepticised, but wouldn't you agree that we'd all like to experience the tale of Uncle from a younger age? Much like many other members of the Van der Lin gang, Uncle had a tough upbringing. This is a topic that could be explored in depth. Plus the character of Uncle, especially concerning his portrayal in RDR2 over the original, is a fun-loving, cheeky chappy. Was he always this way, or did he adopt this persona due to the childhood trauma he mentions as a defense mechanism? All in all, the history of Uncle would be an entertaining topic to explore, plus we may not only find out his real name or why he was called Uncle, but what caused the lumbago. What about if we got to experience an entirely different set of characters altogether? One likely possibility could be the history of Rainsfall and his Wapiti Tribe. There's so much unexplored detail with this character that it's surely enough to form a full tale. Rainsfall has dealt with tragic loss in his time, and although he is now a man of peace during our encounter in 1899, was he always this way? It certainly would be fun to live a life within a tribe, adopting a very different set of ways that we experience as part of a posse of outlaws. We could learn so much of the tribe's way of life, their attempt to form a peace with the government or military, and even potentially the formation of the group. Just how far back in time do Rainsfall's people expand to? I'd like to experience a much younger Rainsfall, seeing how he dealt with dire situations over time, such as when the military stormed his land and took it for themselves. The tale of the Wapiti Tribe is unbelievably interesting, and something I think we would all personally enjoy. The history of Bill Williamson would be an interesting topic. Although we know the outcome of Bill in 1911 and the tales of his time in 1899, but what of before this? Bill was a military man who served proudly, but after his dishonourable discharge following the attempted murder of a fellow soldier and deviancy, as they put it in writing, he fell into a deep pit of doubt and despair, turning to the demon drink to battle the difficulties he faced alone, much like his father. One of the difficulties Bill battled with was his confusion concerning his sexuality. Bill knew who he was, but he felt he had to hide this from his peers for fear of not only judgment but reprimand. During those times, it was seen as a crime to be involved in same-sex relationships in the eyes of many, as only a few short years earlier the death penalty was still implemented for such acts. This is a topic alone that could certainly be explored, diving deep into the mindset of Bill. And what of his time in the military? We know a little of this, including that Bill, alongside his fellow men, fought bravely against the Indians, but surely there's more to be explored. How did he end up in service, and how did he fare during this? We know a little following his discharge, with him admitting that he turned to drink, but why? Did Bill feel the service was all he had due to an unhappy childhood where he lived with an alcoholic father? There's so much that can be explored. We could also explore Bill's time following 1899 before we catch up with him in 1911. How did Bill become somewhat evil, having his former friend gunned down without a pause for hesitation? What happened during that time period to make him as nasty as he became? Now what of the story of the Bell family? For sure, people may not want to experience a game where we step into the boots of Micah, as let's face it, he's just plain evil, but what if we took on the role of his brother Amos? Amos, Micah and their father were a trio of petty criminals many years back, with Amos departing from the group after realising the maddening potential of what Micah and their father were capable of, wanting no part of it. A story exploring their early years could certainly pique interest. We could experience the unravelling of this family, exploring a deep topic concerning the mental decline of the Bell family. Was there something further afoot which could explain Micah's ways that Amos witnessed? Were the boys victim of mental or physical abuse from an early age and both reacted differently later in life? We also have the fact that Amos married and had children, which he stated to Micah that he was in no way to be part of. What exactly happened in his family to arrive at such dramatic measures? Similar to Micah Bell, not many people would want to experience life as Colm O'Driscoll, but what if we took a step back and looked into a time before Colm became inherently evil? What happened in Colm's life to make him unimaginably uncaring? Was it the death of his brother at the hands of Dutch vandalins, in turn killing Annabelle as some form of retribution? The issue with playing as Colm is that many people may be skeptical, knowing how his character turns out, a very similar feeling to playing as Dutch. For the most part, people want to play as a hero. So what if, instead of stepping into the boots of Colm himself, we took on the role of an unnamed gang member? It could be interesting to experience this, but there's also fallback. The tale of being a gang member, watching as their leader becomes more sadistic over time, caring less about the people that surround them before their demise much later, has already been told, so Rockstar would have to implement an entirely new idea. Maybe the character breaking away from the O'Driscolls, leading to fallout between themselves and Colm. Lenny Summers could be an interesting character to experience given his upbringing. Before joining with the Van der Linde gang, Lenny was a loner, taking a crack at the world by himself. Both of Lenny's parents were slaves, a life that Lenny fully expected to experience himself, but luckily this wasn't the case. Even though we know little of Lenny's history, to the point where he became part of the faction, there's still quite a bit we're unaware of. Around the campfire, Lenny tells terrifying stories of his upbringing, and although these add elements to the character of the man, it's not something most gamers would prefer to experience. Also, Lenny is the youngest member of the Van der Linde gang, 18 years old or so if I remember right, so to play as Lenny would mean that he would have to be a child till late teens. This would cause Rockstar a whole bunch of controversy in itself. Remember the flack that Bully got back when it was released? Many media outlets projected hate towards the idea of people attacking minors, such as the school prefects and teachers, where after committing a crime if you will, such as truancy, the adult figures would have no hesitation in tackling young Jimmy Hopkins to the ground. Now imagine that same situation in a Wild West setting where firearms are involved. This wouldn't be a good look. Another one I would love to see is the upbringing of Javier Escuella during his time in Mexico, but again there are drawbacks to this. For starters, Javier couldn't speak any English prior to being taught by Dutch Van der Linde, so the entire game would be narrated using subtitles. It's a shame that Rockstar implemented this drawback to the character, as spending time as Javier during the Mexican Revolution would have been an interesting experience, learning of his love interest and how it led to Javier killing a man for that same love. I think the only way we could truly experience a good narrative for Javier's story would be to play during his time following the fall of the gang, where he fled back to Mexico, the years between 1899 and 1911, where we of course know the result of his final days. That's quite a gap to fill, in which Rockstar could tell a good story. If we remember the last moments we experienced with Javier as Arthur, the man was very reluctant to raise his firearm towards his friend, becoming torn between his loyalty to either Dutch or Arthur. This angle could be later explored to see how it affected Javier's mental state. A popular theory is that we would step into the boots of a now older Jack Marston, as far as we know, due to not knowing the actual outcome of Charles Smith or Sadie Adler, Jack is potentially the last surviving member of the gang. We already know the tale of Jack from when he was a young child, right up until 1914. Following the fall of both of his parents, Jack became isolated from the world, often told by how he reacts to others, being dismissive and harsh. This is something we witnessed when conversating with other NPCs whilst playing as Jack in RDR1. Was it the death of his parents that made him this way? The United States didn't join the fight until April of 1917, but the majority of the rest of the world was still at war. From 1914 to 1917, we have a 3-year gap to fill, which we could tell the tale of Jack. Did he meet anyone? Did he have any offspring? Did he remain at the family home of Beecher's Hope? And did he later serve his country? The latter is an angle that could be explored more, maybe told through flash forwards, similar to how LA Noire did with the flashbacks of Cole Phelps during his time in the Corps. Doing this will potentially be the only way to keep the Red Dead Redemption series as a western, otherwise we would be entering the area of the Mafia, entering an entirely different world altogether, and of course this has already been covered by 2K Games. The story of Charles Smith could be told from 3 different angles: his time before the gang, his time following, and his time after leaving Beecher's Hope, where he planned to move north to Canada in search of settling down and becoming a family man. Prior to falling in with the Van der Linde gang, Charles ran it alone before ultimately deciding this wasn't for him. Was there something in particular that happened during this time that aided that decision? Also, during the events between 1899 and 1907, how did Charles fall in with Guido Martelli, throwing fights for a few dollars? For a man who was fully capable of living off the land, how exactly did this transpire? We could also explore his time up north, including the journey there. Was it as smooth sailing as Charles would have hoped for, or was there bumps in the road along the way? Did he settle down and marry as he planned, or did the Pinkerton detective agents, later rebranded as the Bureau of Investigation, catch up with Charles, potentially similar to Sadie, before he was able to put those plans into action? So many unanswered questions. Although we know the tragic outcome of the life of Sean MacGuire, how much of his history do we actually know of the man? We of course understand that he was an immigrant that travelled to the United States sometime prior to 1899, but why? And how long was he in the country before becoming part of the Van der Linde's gang? And what of his home life? What was life like for the young whippersnapper? Although no doubt a tale that most would like to see, a lot of this would take the narrative away from the Wild West genre, which isn't what the tale of Red Dead Redemption is about. Sean is no doubt a fighter and a hell of a character, and as much as I'd personally love to see more of him, we may have to accept that there isn't a great deal of timeline concerning the Wild West to fill an entire narrative. Unless, similar to what I mentioned about looking at the formation of the gang, Rockstar Games introduced an entirely new array of characters surrounding Sean for us to experience. There are other multiple angles we could explore, such as Guido Martelli's rise from an underboss to pulling the strings in the entire city of Saint-Denis, or the tale of the unnamed Van der Linde gang member who was killed for their betrayal, but both, although they would be interesting narratives, have setbacks. Guido Martelli, for example, even though still set in the Wild West era, would be telling a mafia-style story, once again taking away from the true setting of Red Dead Redemption, and the unnamed gang member wasn't thought of highly enough by the members of Dutch's gang for anyone to either barely speak about or mention by title, emphasising that the character wasn't a strong enough presence within the faction. This would also coincide with the formation of the gang, a tale of which we're already familiar. A good narrative to tell, to myself at the very least, would be to tell a story of an entirely new character. No Van der Linde gang, no O'Driscolls, no Pinkertons, nothing. We step into the shoes of a lawman, maybe a sheriff's deputy or something, who's torn between upholding the law and family. The protagonist's family could be criminals, often causing the character to take a moral look upon the world that surrounds them, forcing them to choose between family and career. Becoming a person of law during this era, even if you had a criminal past, isn't an outlandish thought. We've witnessed this in tales of real-world characters such as Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok. The character could fluctuate between helping his or her family or covering up their dastardly deeds, placing their own career and reputation in jeopardy. There are so many angles concerning that could be explored with this, so if nothing, it's at least food for thought. Or failing this, Rockstar could always explore mini-stories if you will, using a multitude of characters previously mentioned, each exploring their own story individually, but this would be a takeaway from the primary narrative of the tale of the Van der Linde's gang, in which once more the majority has already been told. In closing, and although no doubt some way off, who would you like to step into the boots of in Red Dead Redemption 3? Do you agree with any of the ideas suggested, or do you have some of your own that you'd like to share? Let us know in the comments section. If you enjoyed what you saw today, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. With that being said, and thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.